In part one of our interviews remembering pianist, composer, and mentor James Williams, 6 of his closest friends and fellow musicians revealed how he forged friendships, some of them beginning back in his earliest years in Memphis, and continued to nurture those friendships. They remained a supportive group of friends even as they developed into world-renowned jazz musicians. And the man at the center of it all was James Williams. I have to say, again, the more I learn about James, the more I'm amazed and admire his heart. After the release of part 1 of these videos, I was talking to Donald Brown, who told me that James would call him from time to time and ask him if he talked to Mulgrew lately or any of his other friends. You should give him a call. Or he would say something like, you should give such and such a call. He just lost a family member. I was like, that's something my mother used to do. And of course, I would be annoyed at the time, but looking back on it, you'd have to admit, that's nothing but good. And then there's Tanya Miller, Mulgrew Miller's wife, who said that James would always give her a call and just check in on her after Mulgrew had passed. Here in part 2, we continue with Bill Easley, Bill Mobley, Donald Brown, Bill Pierce, Miles Griffith, and Israel, as they talk about how encouraging James was and how much of an entrepreneur he was. And then we talk about his ICU band, which featured music that allowed him to return to his roots.
James always would recommend people to call me to play that gig. Mm-hmm. And he had Pat Martino called me, he had Clark Terry called me, and he had Betty Carter call me, and I turned them all down. And James kept saying, well, Don, you ain't gonna never think you're good enough. And so, after I turned down Betty, I called her.
Oh, so you thought you weren't ready?
Yeah, because I was playing in top 40 bands when I was practicing jazz, but I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I'm self-taught. I never took piano lessons. So even though I practiced a lot, I practiced developing bad technique, and I used to think the more pain, the better. So I developed these hand problems earlier. And so even though I felt like, I knew a lot of music and stuff, but Betty Carter, I called her back about a week later because, I thought about what James said, and I said, well, I better go ahead and try it. So I called her back, and I said, Miss Carter, if that offer to audition is still staying, I'd like to audition. And she said, oh, forget about it. You'll probably leave me like the rest of them. And I don't know what she meant by it, but James told me that she was kind of bitter because she had the same manager as Dexter Gordon and Woody. And all the cats who had been with her, like Mulgrew, left her to go with Johnny Griffin and Kenny Washington and John Hicks. Now Mulgrew left to go with Woody, but a lot of the cats would leave her band and go off with other cats. And so I guess when she said, "You probably leave me," I like the rest of them. I didn't know what she meant at the time, and so when James got ready to leave Art's band, I thought to myself, I better go ahead and try this because James, I felt like he probably quit recommending me to people. And so, I knew a lot of the music, over the years, just learned the music myself by memory. And then James showed me some of the songs, and he flew me up. Well, first we drove up to St. Louis to hear the band in St. Louis. And then he flew me up to New York to hear the band.
He flew you up.
What's that?
He flew you up.
Yeah.
Wow.
James, like I tell people, he had definitely more belief in me than I had in myself.
Sometimes he would have more faith than you would have in yourself.
Was James contributing compositions to the Messenger?
Always.
You were in there? Yeah.
James always knew the significance of career. He knew of how to. That was just a part of who he was. He knew about. He wanted to be a leader. I never thought about stuff like that. I was just happy to have a gig. But he embraced that whole thing about being a leader, have your own compositions, and what that meant. It took me a while before I understood, the significance of it, but I do now. And a lot of it I did learn from James. James was always basically, promoting himself, but he would also promote his friends as well. I mean, and if he thought you were like getting a little down, he would just say, "Oh man, come on, you can't be like this, man. You gotta, we gotta get out and play, man. People gotta hear you." That's what he used to say.
And I'm kind of an introvert, so it's like even when I came down here to take this teaching job, James told me, he said, "Don, don't go down there being all timid and passive. You Don Brown, they don't know who you are." And James just cracked me up because he'd say that I took it as being funny, but he said, "Man, you Don Brown, they don't know who you are." And so, because that's because I'm not the kind of person who would toot my own horn, but luckily I had James to do that.
Did he ever express his views about the music business?
James was a businessman, man. James was industrious. James had an office down in Manhattan, man, and James was
quite the producer.
He didn't produced me. He produced Billy Pierce. James Williams. Donald Brown. He pushed Mulgrew. He pushed his nephew Tony Reedus. Those are just people off the top. James Williams pushed I'm sure he pushed you when you did it.
Yes, sir. What was the first recording you did with him?
James's first record was a record, and it's not available, but a guy sent me a copy of, recently. I hadn't heard it in years, but it was a record called Flying Colors. The record, James used some of his old friends from Memphis, including Sylvester Sample, who they pretty much grew up together. A drummer by the name of James Baker, who's called Styx. They were in they had a band together from the time they were in high school. And then on the record was me, Billy Pierce, and Slide Hampton. Rediscovered the record here recently, and it's like, man, wow. He wrote a tune for me on that record called Soulful Bill.
Soulful Bill, yes, sir.
We got to the studio, but that was a great honor. It shows the kind of friendship that we had, that he wrote a tune for me. Yeah. Not only did I played on other records of his called like Alter Ego and Progress Report. James produced two. I've never wanted to be a star or anything. I would never that, but not that I didn't want to make a record, but I hadn't made a record up until I guess it was about 1986 or something like that. And it was produced by James Williams. It was I played mostly clarinet on it. And that record was called Wind Inventions. James, that was responsible for that record. And so I just kind of went along with James's plan, and Mulgrew played on it, and his nephew, Tony Reedus.
Yeah.
And I think the bass player was Victor Gaskin. But it was James's doing. James is the one who produced that record. And we talked about what tunes we're going to play and so and so. And you know how sometimes some people have the same idea at the same time. And so we're discussing, well, what are you going to play? You got to play some cover tune, something that's popular now. So James said, that's what friends are for. You understand? So I recorded That's What Friends Are For. And it got a lot of air. All my records got good airplay. James is the one that produced that. James Williams produced a record on me called Easley Said. And on that record, he brought me Ron Carter on bass, Billy Higgins on drums, Donald Brown on piano, George Coleman on tenor, Bill Mobley on trumpet. But it was you're talking about a pretty big budget.
Yeah. I can
You
see.
understand? In other words, because he didn't bring any nickel dime cats to the date. You understand?
What
That
record?
was Jay. Huh?
Record label was that?
You know
Remember?
what? I can't remember the label because I don't know if it's still out there anymore right now, but it's on Amazon. In fact, it be still in. I have probably a couple copies around the house, and Bill Mobley did a lot of the arrangements on it, and so because it was a three horn front line, and Donald Brown was on it, and he wrote a tune for me called "Easley Said." The original title of it was "Easily Said and Done," but somehow it got the twist. It was called "Easily Said Than Done," but the original title was "Easily Said and Done."
You ever hear him express anything about the music business and context of how maybe it was difficult sometimes or unfair? Anything like that?
Not from a standpoint of unfair, but I do know that he was very business savvy. I think about, and I really wanted to pick his brain more about his organization, the Finest organization.
Production, yeah.
And I know that they had started, I went to one of them, and it might have been the only one that happened before he passed. But that it was at St. Peter's, I believe, and he gave out awards, a recognition award, a recognition award through Finest Sound. Wow. And if I remember correctly, one of the recipients was Shirley Horn that year that I went.
Really?
Like I said, it was the only year, and it was a beautiful gathering, because there was so many different musicians, and we all kind of played different configurations that you normally wouldn't have. Was it it might have not been at St. Peter's. I'm thinking it was at St. Peter's, but it could have been at another hall there in New York.
So this was something he produced.
This was something he produced, yeah.
Wow,
and it was an organization that he had, yeah. And it was like an honoree type of situation where he would honor certain people. At the time, it seemed like it was going to be an annual thing, but to my knowledge, I don't know if it happened annually. I think it may have just happened at one time before he passed.
Wow.
So in terms of the music business, I just felt that he was truly, I never heard him talk negatively about it, but at the same time, I can tell by the way that his reactions or his actions that it was something that he knew that from a music business standpoint, it had to be from a standpoint of his own industry, of his own entrepreneurship, forming, a record company, forming a production company. So he never got caught up. I don't think, at least through the time when we were playing together, I don't know that he really ever had a major record label. I know the records that we did were on smaller labels, and in many cases self-produced, and then maybe picked up. There was a record company called Evidence that I think those are two records on. So I think it was. I got the message, and I have been inspired by the fact that, instead of talking about what the record industry was, I saw that he had reacted a certain way in terms of owning his publishing, owning his music and the likes. I do know, though, that in terms of publishing, Don Sickler has, if not a lot of his songs, but most of his work.
That's something that, because the way I understand it is, a lot of cats, talk, complain, to put it bluntly, about the music business, but he was the kind of cat that just took it in his own hands and just did. James Williams eventually became quite the producer, producing studio and live recordings for himself and his friends. And typically, various members of this tight-knit brotherhood played on each other's projects, and they would often record compositions of each other's. The recording that stands out to me as really special was the Bill Mobley Orchestra live at Smalls. James was not the producer on this one, but Mobley says that he was instrumental in getting it recorded and produced. This performance features all the cats, with compositions and arrangements of all the cats. So you're live at Smalls, 96, right?
Yeah.
Man, that is incredible. How did that record do in terms of, I guess, airplay and notoriety?
God, I have no idea.
Really?
I mean, what records do anymore. But it was an incredible experience because that band just kind of, we rehearsed, and played some gigs at Smalls leading up to that.
Okay.
And it wasn't really coming together like that. But that night, somehow it just,
Really?
the spirit of it, and having James Mulgrew and Harold Mabern there.
Yeah. I think it's amazing, man. Everything about it, the personnel, the writing, even the recording, production of it is just amazing. How did you have like some good support funding to put all that together?
Fortunately, yeah. James, that's another thing. He was instrumental in getting, he was very good at business too. So he found people to back projects, and he found one guy, Walter Squindo. He was a Swiss-German businessman. So, and he was into jazz. I don't know where they met, probably over in Europe or something. But Walter would be the executive producer on some of these records. And he had money, disposable income. He could spend $20,000-$30,000 on something, put it out. So that enabled us to do. I was in on a few of those projects, but he helped a lot. Walter Squindo, he's passed, but a lot of those records that were on Space Time label, which is the label that record is on.
Okay.
They're done with his funding.
And James that's one of the things too that kind of impressed me about him in general. He always had different projects happening, trio projects, quartet projects, different recording concepts, the magical trio. He had these real definite. I got a chance to answer your original question. I had a chance to work with James in a lot of different capacities. I mean, I was mainly a member of ICU, as he liked to say, a charter member. But I as a result, certain other things I worked with him on offshoots, and one of my most one of the most memorable experiences that I recall, it was playing with the group he had, was the Contemporary Piano Ensemble.
Oh yeah. Was it 5 pianos?
Yeah, and only James could put us together. I mean, we actually did. I remember doing a tour, and it wasn't his first tour. I mean, because other people had played in that band, but it might have been the last tour that group did. So it was Mulgrew, Donald Brown, Jeff Keezer, James,
Harold Mabern,
5 pianists. And on this particular tour, John Lockwood and I were the rhythm section. And we traveled, we did about a week. It was a week throughout kind of the Midwest. I remember we played Pittsburgh, we played like St. Louis, that kind of, and the thing is, it in order for this to work, we needed to have like 3 pianos on stage.
3.
Three pianos, 3 grand, and somehow, sometimes, people would have to bring the pianos in. That was rarely a place that actually had 3 pianos. You know,
of course,
some people have 2. And so that was quite an experience. And I think that was, I had started teaching at Berkeley by that time. So that probably was like 2003 or so when we did that tour. Yeah.
So they didn't travel around with 5 pianos.
Well, I had heard about a tour that he had did previously that I wasn't on, where they had like a deal with Baldwin.
Yeah.
And they actually traveled with the pianos.
My goodness.
Yeah. You know, and so, but only James could be that entrepreneurish, you know, have that kind of vision to actually carry that out, you know.
He was quite the industrious cat, and just
industrious,
like you say, he put a lot of stuff together. And
very industrious. Yeah. Wrote a lot of music. Always was, if he just find something to do.
And he brings people together.
But sometimes he said, "Oh, you know, I got to write something." And he'd write out something, or he'd transcribe a song, you know, or transcribe a bigger run. He'd transcribe some Chick Corea stuff. I Have a Dream. I remember him transcribing that stuff. He was simultaneously working on the piano part, but always with the composition in there. And he always wanted to have his own music. And luckily enough, he was a good writer. Not everybody is a great writer, but James wrote songs that kind of crossed over a lot of, they weren't necessarily bebop stuff, although there was at first. They were not hardcore jazz. He started making music, or writing songs that were a little bit more accessible. And when he did ICU, it was like with a whole nother focus anyway. It was just making music, uplifting music, and music that wasn't necessarily church-centric, but maybe something like that, you know, something with a little bit more positivity.
And that was kind of the birth of ICU, that conversation. And
that was one of my questions. I was going to ask you, how did he explain that whole concept to you?
Yeah, and that's how he actually, and man, it's funny because it was kind of a chance meeting. We didn't plan on meeting at Tower, but we were just there. And then he was like, "Man, I've been trying to get in touch with you specifically." And that's when he told me the vision. He was like, "You know, I have this concept. I want to put vocals on it. It's going to have a lot of different influences. It's not just going to be straight ahead, blah, blah, blah. And I hear you playing in the drum chair. And I have this idea of Kenny." And I think he mentioned Roger and Miles as vocalists. And so that was that's when he kind of put it in my ear. But as I said, when we finally got together, I would say it had to be at least a couple years, maybe 92-ish.
Okay.
By the time we finally started doing gigs.
Well, so how did the whole ICU thing come up, the intensive care unit? Did he just invite you?
Well, right after that, and the students were talking with him and everything, he pulled me to the side and said, "I'm starting a group. And let me get all your information, and I'll call you within the next 3 months." And so he did, and he wanted to do force. What happened was I know it was self-esteem, Badoo-dee. That one was that one. Baloo-dee-dee-da-da-da. That was one of them.
Okay.
What was the other one?
Truth, Justice, and the Blues?
Truth, Justice, and the Blues was one of them. And a third one. It probably is dee-dee-da, bo-ba, dee-dee-ba, beep-da-dee-da, ba-doo-dee-da, dee-dee-doo-da, da-da-da-da-dee-da. What's the name of that one? I don't remember.
Wow, what's that? I think it seems like he had 2 names for that. Yeah, I can't remember, but yeah.
Yeah, but it was a demo. And it was Christian McBride, it was Christian James, it was
Tony Reedus,
and it was Lockwood and no, sorry, Lockwood did the tour. and it was Billy.
This was before Roger?
No. Roger was with me.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, we met at the recording, doing the demo.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And he's like, oh yeah, hugging one another, say, oh yeah, man, yeah, reminiscing about boys choir.
Wow. So
yeah.
How did James explain the whole concept of intensive care unit project?
He said, well, it's soul, it's gospel music with jazz.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't like a big explanation. It was like, it's the same thing we're doing, it's just that, it's more or less, more gospel tinged, more soulful, more of the thing like the home down thing, down home stuff.
Yeah, his roots.
Snap your fingers,
Yeah.
Tap your feet kind of stuff.
All right.
That kind of music.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you guys did. I think you said you did some gigs first before the recording, right?
Yeah, we did some gigs first, and I think when he did the whole demo, he was with Marianne Topper at the time, and she loved the whole band. Probably not me, He did mention it a couple of times. He was like, man, you got to calm it down. I said, well, you hired me to do me, right? He's like, yeah. So I'm gonna do me. I can't do nobody else. She was the booking agent.
Booking agent. Okay.
She was booking Christian McBride at the time.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So she would get him some gigs, but she was saying to him, well, I could get you a lot more gigs if you get rid of Miles. That kind of vibe. So,
I can't imagine that, man.
Well,
you part of the personality of that thing, man.
People are bugging out. That's all I can say.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm glad he stuck with his guns and did what he did, because that was great. I must say the same thing with Winton. He did the same thing. A lot of people was doing the same thing, and he told me, a lot of people don't want you on this project. I'm like, well, hey, you're the leader, so it's up to you.
Yeah. Man, that's jazz. This music is about us as people and our personalities, whatever that may be,
Yeah.
I only did a few of those gigs with you guys, but how would James, just a little more about ICU, how would James talk to the audience about, intensive care unit? And was there anything you used to say?
Yeah, he, man, as you know, because I mean, you sat in that even vocalizing with us when you were a part of it, and some of the lyrics are just straight up talking about Jesus and everything else. So James, I think, well, not I think, but from my recollection, he just presented the music. He really didn't speak so much philosophically about the songs per se. He would really keep it kind of keep the theme of how he presented. And actually, quiet as kept, I learned a lot from that. He would present the music, and it would be unapologetic in terms of, as you know, the lyrics speak for themselves. And I think that's where he gave room. He let the music speak for itself, and his narration of it would be very general and universal.
Just uplifting music, right?
Yeah, uplifting. And he would say, things like, he would maybe echo a sentiment, yes, or something like that. But he wouldn't go into, I never heard him really go into the depths of, let's say, the theology or something behind the words, And it made sense because, I mean, we played in churches, we played in clubs, too. And then we played everything else in between, festivals and things like that. And the music was presented. He never changed anything. The music was what it was, but he never, I don't know if that was conscious or not, but he really kept things so that it invited everybody, and so And like I said, the music and the lyrics spoke for themselves. I think about your song, "Count It All Joy," which I played a concert Saturday, a CD release, and it came off really well. It was actually in a church, but in that church, it was a jazz concert. It was a concert series that I do called Jazz in the Sanctuary. Mm-hmm. So people from all walks of life, not just Christians, come to these concerts, and we had a packed house on Saturday. And
I think Pierce mentioned that too.
Yeah. And I kind of unconsciously or consciously kind of took a page from James' book. James is practice, so to speak.